Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Tottenham Hotspur, eh? It's never a dull week. We can certainly give them that. If we're going to give them anything, it's that it's rarely ever dull off the pitch at Tottenham Hotspur anyway. First off, straight away, I want to apologise because I've got a bit of a blocked ear. So that, apparently, so my family tell me, is resulting in me sometimes sounding very loud and sometimes very quiet, and you might not quite hear what I'm saying. I'm going to try to keep and maintain a level voice throughout this, but apologies if you're having to put your volume up and down because of it. Hopefully it'll be sorted soon because it's a bit weird. But yeah, Tottenham Hotspur, wow. So this has been the week of irony, I think I'd probably call it. Irony from all sides. In the fact that the fans, and probably me included as well, have been desperately saying, well, certainly the fans have been saying, we want a manager now. It's been too long. We want this new head coach appointed. Someone come in and make a quick decision. Someone get the power away from Daniel Levy. That looks like it's going to happen. And now we're hearing, no, but not that. Which is kind of sums up football, doesn't it? And it sums us up as well. And we'll come on to the whys and the buts and the ifs and all this sort of stuff to come. And when I say there's irony on both sides, there's of course an irony because after this long search, it's looking like it's going to be Paulo Fonseca, who, yes, was moved aside, let's say it that way. Technically, he parted ways with them, but he was moved aside because Jose Mourinho was coming. Yes, Jose Mourinho, the Tottenham Hotspur manager, who Tottenham Hotspur moved aside to bring someone else in. So yeah, there's irony all over the shop here. As always with football, it's not quite as bad as we think it is. As it often is, it's not always quite as good as we think it is. And certainly, I think I'm going to lump myself in this as well. I was distinctly underwhelmed when I heard about Paulo Fonseca, but actually, I went away and did a hell of a lot of research, as I have to do in my job. Watched a lot of Cilla Black there, another impersonation to add to the list. A lot of videos to kind of find out what kind of guy he is, because I must admit he was someone I was aware of, but not someone I really knew too much about. And in the second half of this, I'm going to be talking about him and why it kind of works, and I kind of understand the logic that Fabio Paratici is coming with. Paratici, I think apparently I was supposed to pronounce that. Which I won't. I'll get it completely wrong from then on, because that's unfortunately the way my brain works. But yeah, with Fonseca, I'll get into that later. I've got loads of stuff to tell you about him, so it may further entrench your view that he is not the man. It may make you think, okay, well maybe we'll give him a chance. But what I will say is there's going to be change around him. I'll put it that way. There's a little teaser for you as we come into the final second half of this. But I want to start really with Paratici. I don't know whether that was the right one or whether that's just me doing a really bad Italian accent. So Fabio Paratici is, they're hoping to, at the earliest, could even be unveiled before the end of this weekend. At the worst, early in this week, this coming week. The reason is he's still in Italy, tying up kind of loose ends with the Juventus staff, just making sure he's kind of everything's done there. I'm not entirely sure whether his contract ends at the end of June or not, but I certainly know he is still tying up little bits and pieces. But as soon as that's done, he can be formally announced by Tottenham. But as I've said, I think I said probably in the last video, he has been working away on Tottenham's behalf anyway in the last couple of weeks, getting things lined up. And that's transfers, that's the manager's stuff. I believe that he's going to remain in Italy as well for a fair few weeks, as that's kind of his base of work. I read something in one of the Italian pieces I read, because again, like Fonseca, obviously, my job means I have to fully research everyone as much as I can. And one of the things I found interesting was that apparently he has this hotel in Italy, in Turin, I presume it is, where he does a lot of his works and meetings with agents, which is weird, isn't it? You'd kind of, well, no, maybe not. I was going to say it's weird because you'd expect to go to training ground, but actually I guess in terms of maybe being a little bit more subtle, although it probably isn't with the Italian media, maybe meeting in a hotel or happening to be in the same hotel at the same time, But apparently that's where he does a lot of his work with agents and talks to them in the kind of. I think he actually has an office there. I'm sure I read that as well. One of the things we'll have to ask him because. Yeah, so sorry. The reason for that story is that he is going to remain in Italy, I think, for a few weeks. I mean, obviously, I suppose with all the COVID regulations and isolations, perhaps they're waiting as well until Italy comes off and or goes into the green list, and then it's far easier for him to just come over, crack on, get going at Tottenham and working at Hotspur Way and stuff. But yeah, so he's on his way, and what I find interesting about this one is that there's a part of me that kind of thinks, we've seen this before. Spurs have done the director of football structure. They've had, I think David Pleat was the first one in the ENIC era. We've had Frank Arneson, Damien Comolli, Franco Baldini, Paul Mitchell, Steve Hitchin obviously has kind of been doing that within his role. So you kind of think to yourself, well, they've been here before and it hasn't really worked. You could argue maybe probably the most successful times under Poch was when maybe he didn't really have a particular director of football. I suppose the Mitchell era slightly overlapped it, but I think he was on gardening leave for a lot of that as well. But what I understand about the Paratici, I think, the Paratici role is that he's actually going to be more like he was at Juventus, where he was, I think it was chief football officer was the exact title he had, or something like that. I think it has a slightly different turn in Italian. But which means that he's kind of more than a director of football. It's a more all-encompassing role, and essentially it is the club's. From what I understand, Spurs want him to become like the face and voice of the club, as in the hierarchy. So there's obviously an element of trying to take the heat off Daniel Levy, I'd imagine, as well, and sticking this poor 48-year-old Italian slap bang in the middle, right in the middle of the cameras, or down the barrel, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think, which will be good for the fans and for us as media, for myself as media, is that he seems quite an accessible chap. The way it works in Italy, and I think it's the same in Germany, is that sporting director types will talk to the media before every match. So you kind of get a lot of clarity, I think is probably the best word to use. You get to understand more of the decision. So the head coach doesn't really have to get asked loads of stuff. I mean, Ryan Mason's probably still having nightmares about having to answer questions about, Super League, Kane and Bale, all within his few weeks as interim head coach. Whereas I think in the European structure, more of those questions are aimed towards the sporting director because they're more involved in those kind of discussions. So I like that. I like the fact that because, let's be honest, as a journalist, it's an absolute nightmare with Daniel Levy being such a kind of publicity shy, reluctant kind of hates the limelight kind of guy. And I think the knock-on effect for him is because he doesn't talk and because he doesn't humanise himself in any way with the people, he kind of comes across as this ogre, this Dr. Evil type. And, I'm trying to think if I've even spoken to him. I mean, we've had a couple of press conferences. I think I maybe asked a question or two in those. Said hello once before one of those press conferences and shook his hand as he shook everyone that came in the room. It wasn't a case of, I knelt before him or any weird stuff. But yeah, other than that, he hasn't really spoken to me. He does the odd interview once in a blue moon. And I think, like I say, I don't think that helps his cause whatsoever because, you get a lot of these quite active chairmen in the Premier League and stuff who you hear a lot from. They explain the decisions and why they're doing it. And because they're a human face, I think maybe when they make mistakes, people can be a little bit more, okay, I get why they're doing that. But when you're kind of this, almost, he's not, clearly, but it kind of comes across as this, evil genius in his lair, like stroking a cat, going, whoa, kind of thing. And it's like, it does him no favours, and I think maybe Paratici coming in and having, or this role will at least give us a proper insight into what's going on. Because let's be honest, in the last year or so, some of the PR disasters Spurs have lurched from one to the next, and I think everyone, probably inside the club as well, just scratching their heads thinking, what are you doing? And I think having someone that can stand up there and explain why they've done it, maybe taking the fall for it, but maybe in the future, isn't a bad thing at all. So no, I'm intrigued to see how it works with him. He's already, like I say, he's already been working hard, Paratici, on not only the head coach stuff, but transfers as well. I understand, and I said this in a story yesterday, which went down well with a lot of people, that a number of Tottenham Hotspur players have been told, in the most politest of terms, you can have a move away. Seek yourself some move away because you're probably not going to be likely to be part of the plans next season. Some people struggle with this. Some of the fans, I've seen this and they're like, oh my God, how can you do that without even having a manager in place? So I can't remember if I explained this before, but I will explain it very briefly again. In a director of football structure in Europe, the continental structure, the club and the director of football, on the whole, decide what the squad looks like and what it's going to be like. And the reason for that is so you have continuity. So the coach comes in, the coach will work with the players he's given. There's a little bit of say, not as much as a manager. Say Pochettino in his Spurs time very much had the final say on what players came in. In this continental structure, the manager will be able to say, like, I'd like a striker, I'd like a centre-back, or I'd like a right winger. He'll be brought a load of options and they'll kind of have a discussion over it. But ultimately, it's about the club having a continuity. So say if that manager had a nightmare and left after 6 months, a year, the club as a whole doesn't suddenly flip-flop all over the place from a very different style to this, to that, to that. They keep their identity and they keep their profile. I mean, a very good example probably in the British game is someone like Swansea. Swansea appoint a certain type of head coach or manager and it fits within what they want to do exactly, and that's why all Swansea teams have this very much a strong identity to them. And that's the plan with Tottenham. That's what they're looking to do. So I get people kind of maybe look at it from the slightly, not old-fashioned, but the traditional British view of the manager should be picking the players. What a nightmare coming in and picking players that he's not even wanting at the club and stuff like that. Or maybe they're getting rid of someone that he would have wanted to have. It's like, it's kind of I don't want to say a lesser role, but it's a role that is purely focused on coaching what you've got. And Paratici will take on I'm going to get to the end of this and people are going to say, I'm going to get an Italian person saying, no, you're pronouncing it completely wrong, but with an Italian accent. But I have been told by an Italian person that's how you say Paratici. And I'll probably say it 100 different ways during this. But yeah, so his role will be very much, sometimes I think they call it a general manager role, and it's because he is generally the manager of it all. Everything football related. And that keeps that structure going. So that's the reason for that. So yes, so a number of players have been told they can move on and look for new clubs. The squad's needed a revamp for a while. Like I've said, I've always felt the painful rebuild, as Poch once called it, had begun already. You look at it and I think, I can't remember, was it 11? It was either 11 or 13 new players have come in. A lot of traditional key players from the Pochettino era have gone. But I still think there's a lot of maybe the fringe players that have been there in the last 4 or 5 years that probably have sat around for too long, never really looked like they were either didn't look like they were going to become first choices, or when they haven't really taken their place as a higher level to those who have come before. So yeah, I mean, I must admit, I know it's a number of them. I'm not going to be able to say exactly who, but I think we can pretty much safely say it's Serge Aurier is one of them, because Serge Aurier has already indicated he wants to leave. I think you're probably safe to look at a number of the players who are coming to the end of their contracts in the next 12 months or so. So that gives you Eric Lamela, that gives you Moussa Sissoko. Technically, he's got a year left, but technically there's an option for another one. Spurs, when they announced it, for some reason, announced it as a bundle, but technically his new deal, I think, was 3 years plus one. That could be the case that, it's players that are coming to the end of the contract. Lloris, as of reasons I've said before, I'm maybe slightly more dubious if Lloris goes, purely because I think it would cost Spurs so much to replace him and he wouldn't bring in a lot of value to go now. It's almost worth, if he isn't going to get a new contract, seeing him out to the end of his contract, if you see what I mean. Unless Paratici comes in with a fantastic Italian option, or someone else that he wanted at Juventus and it's a deal that's just worth doing, and then they could let Lloris go on and then the wages come off. Because the wages are a factor too. You look at Danny Rose, obviously, has moved on now and his wages will come off that bill. Paulo Gazzaniga has moved on as well. I'll have a little word about both of those right near the end of this as well. But the key for Paratici is getting players out the door and bringing funds in, not only off the wage bill but in transfer funds as well. Because I know it frustrates the hell out of people, but Tottenham, the pandemic's hit them hard. It has a lot of their money is tied up in property, in the buildings, in the stadium, in the complex, and they have to sell to buy. It's as simple as that. But by the sounds of it, the players that they're looking to sell are the kind of players I'd say. I think a few of them, certainly Lamela for me. I like Eric Lamela. I think maybe this season proved that even when fit, he still wasn't guaranteed to be a starter. And that probably tells me that as one of the club's higher owners, he probably does need to move on for his own career. But yeah, it's about kind of bolstering those funds. I mean, we've already seen Juan Foyth gone out this week. Like I said, Villarreal we're always going to take that option. It was one of those deals where at the time, you look at it was 15 million euros, which at the moment is about 12.8 million pounds. That plus the loan fee. I don't know what the loan fee would have been, but you'd imagine it had been a fair little whack for a player of that kind of age and potential. So let's say, for argument's sake, I'm not saying this is the figure, but let's say for argument's sake it was £3-4 million loan fee. So then you're looking at about 16-17 million maybe in all for Villarreal. I've got him. At the time, it's probably maybe what you would have sold Foyth for if you were selling him. Obviously, now with hindsight, he had a very good season with Villarreal. He ended up as Europa League winner, was superb. Emery loved him, the Villarreal fans loved him, and I'd imagine if they were like flipping houses, if Villarreal were to now sell him next week, they'd probably make maybe another 10 million on top. So yes, in terms of, it was one of those deals where at the time, probably a good one, in hindsight, not such a good one. And I like Foyth, I always have. I think I've got, maybe part of it comes from a little bond. I did with Ben Pearce, we did his first ever kind of sit-down, long interview with him. We sat down at a school in the Tottenham area for a good half hour, 45 minutes at least with him. And he's a very, very intelligent young man. And I think this season's kind of proved that he just needed game time. He needed to develop. So, but anyway, he's gone. He's gone, unfortunately. And that does bring in, though, that 12.8, depending on whatever the currency exchange rate was, it's around 13 million for the coffers. And then you've got Marcus Edwards, remember him? He obviously went to Vitória from Tottenham in Portugal a couple of seasons back now. But he had, as part of the deal, he went for barely anything. May have even been free because Spurs had inserted a 50% sell-on clause. So it looks like he's going to be heading off to Sporting Lisbon now for some reports in excess of £10 million. So Spurs from that deal now could make around £5 million. So put those together, obviously you're up to about 18 million for the transfer kitty. Although will Paratici get the entire 100% of the transfer funds that are coming in this current climate? I don't know. I don't want to say yes or no. It could be either. But certainly there's money coming in. And from what I've told, Paratici is working hard with the agents of these players and with the clubs that he's got very good connections with of getting these players out the door. I saw one link with Sissoko today to, might have even been Napoli. It'd be quite interesting. I think with Paratici's arrival, we're going to see a lot of Italian links. A lot of them coming in, going out the door. Pretty much every player that plays in Serie A will be linked with Spurs, and every Serie A club will be linked with buying Spurs players. I think even Juventus were linked with signing Harry Kane. It's going to be an utter mess for me because I'm going to have everyone saying, oh, but this, Gazzetta dello Sport or Corriere dello Sport, I can never remember the names, I apologise for that, Tutto Mercato are going to be, have said that blah blah's leaving or player X is coming to Tottenham. Is this true? I'm probably going to say 80% of it, if not more, is going to be agent talk and just pushing their players out there because they think that's an easy win, isn't it? But some of it will be true because obviously Paratici's expertise will be in that Italian market. But from a lot of his work at Juventus, he brought in a lot of talents from France and Germany as well. So he's, everything. I think I've said this about him before, so I don't want to go on too much. But those who, everyone, even his critics say he is very, very good with his contacts. He's got superb contacts and brilliant relationships with many, many agents and clubs, and he gets some very good deals for very talented young players, which fits Spurs' remit. Some people say he struggles to sell players, and he can sometimes get. Certainly, Juventus got lumbered with a lot of overpaid players. He's kind of, on the whole, his free transfers were excellent. There were a few that didn't really work. I guess Ramsey, maybe Rabiot to a point as well. So he doesn't work all the time. But then he gets people like Kingsley Coman, who actually was a brilliant free transfer, but then Juventus actually made the mistake, really, of letting him go off to Bayern, and he kind of became a star at Bayern. But yeah, so, there's 11 years at Juventus. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make brilliant signings. But from what I can tell, on the whole, during those years, he did more good than he did bad. Some of his critics will say that when Beppe Marotta left, that he was the CEO above who brought Paratici with him from Sampdoria. When he left, when Paratici was in full control, maybe things weren't as good transfer-wise, but we'll see. We'll find out how that kind of works, won't we, at Tottenham? Because he's going to be very much thrust into a new league and he's going to have to adapt very quickly. But yeah, he is trying to get players out the door. So that's the main thing. I think that's something that Spurs have struggled with, and hopefully he finds that a little bit easier than some of his critics say in Italy as well. But I was just trying to think of some of the players that could head off there. It is mainly those people, isn't it? I mean, I think one of the centre-backs will probably go as well as Foyth, whether it be Dyer, Sanchez, Alderweireld. I think one of them will have to go because from everything I understand, and I've said this before, and I don't believe it's changed in any way, shape or form, Tottenham's priority as their first signing they want to get sorted out is a centre-back. I've said before, they do like Joachim Anderson. I don't think it's Joachim, I think it's Joachim Anderson. And obviously, they've got a decent relationship with Lyon and Jean-Michel Aulas as well. So Paratici will be well aware of him as well. He's a former Sampdoria player. He'll know him from his Serie A time. And if that's a move that Spurs still look to push through because he is a young leader, he knows the Premier League, then they'll look to get that done. But maybe that Paratici comes in with other people in mind. I know Spurs liked Milenkovic at Fiorentina as well. That may be someone that Paratici feels that he can bring in and that is better suited, or there could be other people. But either way, centre-back is a priority, absolute priority. So I see links with people like Marcus Thuram, who Spurs do like him, but I'd be surprised if they get any funds in and that immediately goes on someone like Thuram, who's, as a winger, or a striker like I saw Gonzalez linked as well. I'd be very surprised if any of that sort of deals come early in the window. I think any money they get in first, I think they have to make sure they get that centre-back, and that's what I keep hearing. So, yeah, I'd be very surprised if they kind of frittered away the money on someone in a non-priority position right now. Obviously, they're going to, if probably unlikely that Carlos Vinicius will come back, so they will need another striker. And if other wingers like Lamela move on and anyone else, then yes, they will need to replace them. But the one that isn't a replacement is very much a centre-back. So that will be the first stuff that he'll get to work on as well. But yeah, ultimately, the main first thing that Paratici had to come in and sort out was the head coach. Now we get to the bit where you've all, and I think understandably, have been moaning. Because like I say, I was very underwhelmed as well when I first heard the name, because it was someone that I know was not high up on the list for them originally, and that is Paulo Fonseca. So, Paulo Fonseca, 48 years old as well, exactly the same as Paratici, although Paratici I think turns 49, I think next month. Where do I start? Right, okay, let's start with how fans feel. I can understand completely how they feel in terms of when you've been talking about a triumphant return for Mauricio Pochettino, when you've been talking about one of the best managers in the world, Antonio Conte, and then the club a week later are close to appointing Paulo Fonseca, who, let's be honest, probably a bulk of Spurs fans may not have even heard of. I can completely understand why they would think, oh, for goodness sake. And it would just be like, oh, Tottenham Hotspur. And I get it. I do get it. Like I say, Tottenham, I understand, spoke with him a few weeks back before Paratici came in, and they were impressed by him. They were impressed by the way he carried himself and the way he came across in those talks. He's a very charismatic guy. I'll come to that in a little bit. But ultimately, they just had people above him in the list, you know. Certainly, as I said before, I don't want to go into all the previous stuff. If you want to know about the previous stuff, watch the previous videos. But, you know, we know Pochettino was the top choice. And then when they started, they realised that the door was closed on Pochettino coming in. Then they looked at Conte because of the Paratici links as well, but also because of the fact that he was a free agent. And why wouldn't you kind of look at that option? For me, as I always said, it made no real sense in flip-flopping from one. We were talking about this, you know, earlier, about the structure of European, the management structure and how that keeps continuity. You know, they absolutely went from Pochettino, who I'm led to believe didn't want to work in a director of football structure and was a very different kind of profile, to Antonio Conte, who was completely different. But I think the fact that he'd worked with Paratici was one of the key drivers as well. So that didn't work, you know, as you well know, and I well know, because it all went absolutely bananas during my days off last week. So close, yet so far, I think is probably the best expression. So anyway, that's the past. So Paratici came in and he said he's one of his top choice pretty much after Conte. Obviously, he would have loved Conte because he knows he's a winner. But I also probably think Paratici, as soon as he realised the financial state of Tottenham and what they could actually give Conte, I think he probably thought, well, maybe as a fit, it's probably we'd have a compromised version of Conte, not the full Conte, if you'll pardon the... is that a pun? I don't think it's really a pun. It's just a very bad joke. Not the full Conte, so you wouldn't get, you know, the guy that's won in every single place because he's been well funded and be able to shape the team exactly how he wants it, and he's a brilliant coach in that respect. You'd have had a Conte who probably, let's be honest, would have got pretty hacked off quite quickly with life at Tottenham Hotspur, and he would have probably come up against exactly what Mourinho came up against, in that maybe, you know, it was a bit like managing with one arm tied behind his back. So, when Conte was done, Paratici turned to Fonseca, who apparently was very impressed with Italy. He was someone that he looked at while he was Juventus chief football officer. And he actually, when you look at it on paper, he fits the profile of what Tottenham are looking for quite well. He does play very attacking football. Very, they create a lot of chances. His Roma side did, and he seems like to play with a bit of swagger. They keep the ball. It very much is, and I'm going to use the horrible air quotes, the Tottenham DNA that Daniel Levy was looking for in that final day message. That was what they were after, and that was what he got. So, as I said, did a lot of research into him the last couple of days because I wanted to find out as much as possible because, as I always say, I look to be objective. So while my initial gut feeling was exactly the same as many of you, which was underwhelming stuff, obviously I have to then back that up with as much information as I can possibly get and to have an informed opinion on him. And I looked back and I looked at a lot of his stuff. I watched loads of kind of documentary stuff on him. There's some good stuff on YouTube, various TV channels that have done pieces on him from Portugal that come with English subtitles, and there's some really good stuff as well. So looking back on his career kind of thing, he knocked about a bit in Portugal. He kind of bounced around a little bit. He did some very good things in Portugal. He was with Paco, I want to get their name right, Pacos de Ferreira. It took them into the Champions League. So when you think about the Portuguese teams, you know, that's probably not one of the teams you think about, but he got them into the Champions League and kind of off the back of that got the Porto job, which didn't really work for him. He was then with Braga. He won the Portuguese Cup with them for the first time, and I think it was only the second time in their history. I think it was the first time in about 50 years with them. Then after, I think it was after Porto, sorry. I think it was after that. He ended up at Shakhtar Donetsk. Did very well there. And I think a lot of people are, I get it. They're saying, oh yeah, but, he won in Shakhtar Donetsk, anyone can win there. That's not technically the case, but I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the top teams in Ukrainian football because there's no real need to. I think the way to look at it is that he did very well in Europe with Shakhtar Donetsk, and they got a lot of praise, his team, from a lot of places. I mean, he took them, it's the last 16 of the Champions League. I remember they beat Man City. Pep Guardiola said it was one of the best teams he'd ever faced, although to be fair, I think he said that about a fair few teams. But they got a lot of praise, especially, like I said, they play with that swagger. They play with a real knowledge of where each other are on the pitch, and it's very attractive to watch. And let's be honest, we've missed that in the last 18 months. I certainly, as a journalist, while I saw a lot of good things Jose Mourinho did, in terms of watching the football matches, you'd probably get a few bits in every game that would make you, that's wow. But a lot of it was a tough watch. And I think we all want to win. Everyone wants to win matches, win silverware. But I think a lot of the enjoyment from football comes from enjoying the matches. And I get the sense from everything that I've kind of researched about him is you will get that. You will get entertaining matches. He went to Roma after Donetsk, and it's an interesting one. His Roma time's kind of now being slightly looked down. It's one of those where I think maybe people might look back on it in a slightly different way. So he went to Roma, who were very much in a transition phase. I've seen people saying, he took a Roma team that were always in the Champions League, and he made them a Europa League team. It's like, no, he didn't. He came in kind of when that decline had already started, and they finished, I think, 6th in the season before he came. And in that next season, he improved them. He took them up to 5th place. And then obviously last season got them into the Europa League semi-finals. And also in the league season itself, people have looked at it and gone, oh, God, he finished 7th with Roma. But it actually wasn't. That's kind of not looking at the full picture of the season. Roma were 3rd for a lot of. I think they were 3rd by March. They were playing some of the nicest football. A lot of the Italian kind of pundits and stuff were saying they were probably one of the nicest teams to watch. And they were in 3rd place. They were really flying high. And then in March kind of time, they started to get a lot of injuries, and they didn't have the biggest of squads. And you just saw them kind of tail off in those final months. And obviously, he then had the Mourinho announcement, I think, in between the 2 legs against Man United in the Europa League semi-finals. So it wasn't the ideal end to the season, and they went from 3rd down to 7th. I think they something like won 3 of the last 12 games. So, yeah, I think the criticism will come from that point, and the criticism I think will also come from some people say that defensive-wise, that's one area of weakness for his teams, that they're so focused on the attack that maybe they don't focus enough on the defence. But Spurs have a solution, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. And the other side of that is that he, defensive-wise especially, that was why they were getting picked off in games against the bigger teams. They were smushing everyone else, but in the bigger games, weren't doing so well. But for the plus side, every player that I've kind of looked at that has spoken about him raves about Fonseca. He seems to be what they call in the game a player's coach. He's someone, I think there's little elements of Pochettino there. I'm not going to go down that line too much because I think it's very difficult to compare certain managers. But he very much is a guy that has a very close bond with his players and improves them. I think that's a lot of the players that people have spoken of. I mean, you look at some of the young players he brought through. I think Diego Jota, he gave him his debut as a teenager at Pacos de Ferreira. I think it was Pacos de Ferreira. Forgive me if it's not. And there's other players. I think Fred, now at Man U, I think was one of his younger players at Shakhtar. And there's various ones. At Roma, he was very good with some of their younger players as well. But he's also got a bit of steel to him. You know, Edin Dzeko, there was a little bit of, I don't know how to put it. Let's just say he had to lay down the law a little bit to Dzeko, and he was, very much, I think a lot of Italians kind of felt that the way he dealt with that was very kind of right. He did it the right way. And Dzeko obviously ended up, I think he was top scorer for Roma last season with 20 goals, something like that. So, he's got that about him. He's a very charismatic guy. You get that from watching the stuff. One of them I watched was I can't remember what country it was from, but it was a little documentary that followed him for a week when he was at Shakhtar. And he's a very charismatic chap. I watched another one with, it was like an aroma. I think it was just before they came back from the pause in the season last season due to the pandemic. And there was this lady doing an interview with him. And to say that she was slightly bewitched by him during the interview would be an understatement. She was... she liked him. Let's put it that way. He is a very charming chap. He comes across very well. I think as well that as soon as he got to Italy, he started learning Italian. I think by the end he was very, very good with his Italian. And I think his English is very good as well. So you're not going to have that issue. And yeah, he is. He's a very charming chap. Very, very much a player's coach, I think is the key way to say it. And I think, let's go for it now. I was going to say about the defensive side of things. That's the big weakness. That's the big red cross against him in a lot of the stuff that he's done. He's done a lot of good stuff. Won silverware. This is the thing. He is a guy that is coming into the club. He's not a guy coming in who's like a... excuse me. I've seen people saying, why didn't you just pick Graham Potter, blah, blah, blah. Aside from the fact that I think the director of football has to pick his head coach. That has to be. It has to, for the structure to work, that has to be the case anyway. But, Fonseca will be coming in with silverware behind his name. He's a guy who's won stuff as a manager. He's won cups, he's won leagues, he's won this and that. He's not coming in as someone that doesn't know how to do that. But like I say, the red cross against him is a defence. So how I believe that Spurs are going to look to kind of counteract that, and Fonseca himself, is that he's going to have a different backroom team. And that's not just from, that's a whole thing. That's because his assistant for the last 15 years, Nuno Campos, they're going their separate ways. They're going off to different challenges. So straight off the bat, he's going to need a new assistant manager. And I understand that what we're doing right now, the process that we're in, is that Tottenham and Fonseca are now in the stages where the contract formalities are pretty much all there and being tied up, the finer details. But now it's just about sorting out that backroom staff. And from what I understand, he's working with the club to kind of form this new look backroom staff. One that's ready for the Premier League, which is very different to what he's had before. And that will have an emphasis, like the newer coaches, I think, will have an emphasis on the defensive side of the game as well. So the idea, I think, is something clearly that Tottenham were aware of, and Paratici was, that, wonderful football, fantastic stuff, but if we're going to do that in the Premier League, we have to also make sure you're tightening up the defence, and there's a structure at the back that allows you to play that lovely football. So that sounds like, from everything I'm told, that's something that they're working on to create something a little different for Fonseca to be able to do. He will agree to, he will be involved in deciding on this backroom. So it's not he's going to have people just forced upon him. He will be, I suppose it'd be quite exciting for him. It's, he's 15 years with the same people. It'll be strange, but he will also be moving into a new era for him of a new team, a new challenge, a new way of doing stuff. And I think he'll be able to get his ideas and philosophy across to Tottenham players, but it'll also have new ideas, fresh ideas on the defensive side of stuff, especially coming in for him, which, who knows, this could be the start of a beautiful kind of partnership. It could work really well. I can't imagine Spurs will give him a very long deal. I think it'll be one of those, let's see how this goes kind of things. There's been talk that it could be either a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal with an option for a third. And I think that Spurs probably, in these financial times, protecting themselves a little bit. And, if it works brilliantly, which everyone will obviously hope it does, then very quickly that option will be taken or a new deal will be coming. But, I think it's really interesting. I mean, Spurs, from what I hear, the intention is to announce Paratici, like I say, either this weekend or very early into next week. when all the Juventus stuff is tied up. And then Fonseca will come quite quickly after that once they've sorted out all the backroom staff stuff. So, yeah. So I get it. I get the underwhelmed nature of people. I was there as well. What I would suggest is clearly it does nobody any good if we're all kind of doom and gloom right from the start. Certainly, like I say, my way of writing would never be like that. It's exactly the same with Mourinho. I was never, even with preconceived notions that other people have said, I went into it with fresh eyes, and that's exactly what I'll try and do with Fonseca and Paratici. And, you know, I must admit, some of the stuff I hear about him that's good is very, very good. And that'll be really exciting to see how he puts under the pitch. I think we'll see Spurs moving the ball around really nicely. We'll see them creating a lot of chances. And, you know, Harry Kane, excuse me, is going to be, you know, as I say, Spurs expect him to be playing for them next season. So he's going to have a lot of chances to score goals, I think. You know, he could end up, he was brilliant. Mourinho was fantastic for Harry Kane. But who knows, if he continues to improve the way he is, and he plays for a team that creates even more chances for him, he could even better his stats from this season. It'll be fascinating to see how Fonseca uses him, whether he wants him to continue to be the playmaker as well, or whether he says to him, look, Paratici and I are going to work on bringing someone in who's going to be your playmaker maybe, and you just get up there and you score goals. You'll get a lot of them for me. It'll be interesting to see which way it goes. He may feel that he's actually better served doing what he's done this season. You know, I can understand the whole if it ain't broke, don't fix it thing, but with Harry Kane, you know, he could probably score even more goals, couldn't he? If you think about how Spurs didn't create a lot of chances in some matches, they were barely getting near the goal. So, you know, if they're certainly creating chances, and like I say, if the defensive side is sorted out with the new coaching setup and the new people, I understand. I think Ledley King will be involved. People get a little bit overboard on Ledley King, saying like, "Oh, you know, it's his fault. Why isn't he doing this better?" Blah blah blah. Ledley King is, I don't want to be disparaging, but he's kind of a little bit like the work experience boy in your company. Again. When I say work experience boy, this is a guy who's been one of the top defenders, I'd say, in the world. And if it wasn't for his injury and his knee problems, he would have been at the very top of the game for a long time. So yes, when I mean work experience boy, that's purely meant in terms of his coaching. His coaching, he has no coaching qualifications of any major note. So he is very much learning his trade. So, you know, people kind of just need to give him time to develop. Ryan Mason, I'm not entirely sure. From everything I'm hearing at the moment, sounds like he's going to go back to his head of youth development role. If, you know, Fonseca may well come in and kind of wow him and charm him and say, you know, I'd like you to be part of my backroom staff. But as it stands right now, I understand he's going back to his head of youth development role. I suppose there's an element for me of, might be slightly awkward, you know, being in that situation where he's worked with these players. He might be thinking, well, I wouldn't do that. Why are you doing that, Fonseca? And you kind of think, is that the right, not conditions, right relationship to create right now? And, you know, it'd be very difficult, I think, having been the head coach for, 6 weeks or so, and then to go back to listening to someone else giving out the orders. I can kind of understand that. But let's see. It may go the other way. And he may be wowed and convinced to come on board, or everyone might just be happy of him going back to the youth development, where I was told he was doing a really good job of bringing on the young players and working with them and all of that as well. So, yeah, keep an eye on that one. But it's certainly going to be, I think the key thing is a summer of change at Tottenham. I think it really is. There's been some talk that, you know, yeah, and I understand it. I think you can definitely look at it and you can say, they've gone for Fonseca because he's a cheap option, he's free. I would say so was Conte. That was probably very much looking at someone who's a free agent as well. But with Fonseca, and I think the other thing people were saying is, they've brought him in because he's very good at working with what he's got. That was the case at Roma. He kind of very much was told, look, we're in a bit of a transitional state. You've got to kind of just get on with what you've got. I think at Tottenham, I don't think that's going to really be the case this summer. Because like I said, there's so many players that are looking to try and get out the door to raise funds for new players coming in. I think it's going to be quite a different looking Tottenham side. I think it's going to have the real Paratici stamp on it. And that allows Fonseca then to put his stamp on it. So yeah, I don't think the Tottenham side that will kind of start this coming season will maybe not start because excuse me, there'll be the transfer window closes a few weeks in, and we know how Tottenham work. So it may be that the Tottenham team that's a month or two into the season maybe won't resemble the one from last season too much. Other than obviously the star players, the key players, and yeah, I don't think having a summer of change at Spurs is any bad thing. Let's be honest, it's been a very difficult club to enjoy over recent seasons. It really has for various reasons, from the top to the bottom. And I think in Danny Rose, another kind of name from the past who gave great service to Spurs over 14 years. Sounds like excuse me, I've talked myself dry again. It sounds like he's going to head off to Watford. Certainly, they seem to be kind of in advanced talks for him, I think. Gazaniga going on as well, and I think we'll see more. It's going to be a different dressing room, and I don't think that's a bad thing for Fonseca. I think, this was, where Pochettino's strengths probably lays, that he got rid of a lot of the kind of old cliques that were in the club, and he kind of worked with younger players, and he created this kind of family atmosphere. And from what I've told about Fonseca, that's kind of what he looks to do as well. He likes to have that tight-knit group, and like I say, the players love it. I can't remember various names right now. I think it was Florenzi, the right back. I think he was playing last night for Italy. He wasn't even playing for Fonseca much. He wasn't getting much game time. They eventually loaned him out to PSG. But he still said of Fonseca he's one of the greatest coaches he's ever worked with. And this was a guy who'd been at Roma for years. He was in his 30s. Sorry, I'm going to take a quick drink. I don't know if I've done that in a video before, but otherwise you're just not going to hear me. I'm going to be coughing a lot. So he was saying he was one of the greatest coaches he's worked with. I think Zaniolo said really good stuff about him. Centre-back loves him, whose name's completely gone out of my head. It was someone that Spurs was linked with. Spurs will be linked with a lot of Roma players. They will in the weeks to come. They'll be linked with a lot of Juventus players and Serie A players. But I think he's one of those where people are going to be underwhelmed. They are. But I think you kind of just have to have that new season hope. I think that we all have. And like I say, keep an eye on the defensive changes to the backroom staff. It'd be very interesting to see who comes in and who they decide. Whether it's people we know, whether it's people that have been plucked by Paratici from, Italian clubs. Italian clubs obviously famous for their defensive nature of the game, and I think that was why Roma were quite different. They were a team that very much played on the offense a lot. So it'd be interesting to see whether that's married up with a more cautious, or not cautious, maybe a more drilled defensive backline structure. With a coach, a defensive coach is coming in. So yeah, I wouldn't write it all off now. It's going to be a very different Tottenham Hotspur, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Daniel Levy, I believe, is in the Bahamas right now. There's lots of speculation that he's out there with Joe Lewis. Whether that's what those, if they are there together, and if there are talks, what's happening. You'd imagine, like anyone, he would have to have some form of appraisal, and certainly the last year doesn't reflect on him particularly well. Certainly a lot of decisions that you kind of think, so it'd be interesting what comes of that. Maybe something financially good might come of it. You never know. I wouldn't put my money on Joe Lewis putting money into Tottenham Hotspur after 20 years. But whether it's, putting other things in motion like those long-awaited naming rights, Spurs could do with some finances coming in. Wouldn't it be great for Paratici to be able to come in and actually, rather than looking through his contacts book and thinking, right, okay, I can only go for, players DE level down, rather other than the odd incredible free signing or cheap signing that I've worked out, I can actually look at some of these CBA types that I'd love to sign. But maybe I'm just dreaming on that one. But he ultimately, the key for Paratici is he has to create the perfect environment for Fonseca to flourish, because Fonseca is his man. He's the one who's picked him. Like I say, he wasn't one of Tottenham's top choices. They had other people ahead of him. But Paratici wants him. It's part of the structure. That's crucial. and he then has to make him work, because if he doesn't, that's the one thing about standing in the firing line, is you're in the firing line, and if your decisions don't work, it quickly becomes your mistake. But what I would say, he was a guy that was at Juventus for 11 years, Paratici. He's not going to have come to Tottenham for a short-term gig. He'll have come to Tottenham, you'd think, to create another legacy in the Premier League. Fonseca, for his part, has always been his dream to come to the Premier League. Some of these documentaries I've seen from years back have him saying it. So they're both going to be two people that very much want to make it work and make it work for the long term. And like I say, I just hope Spurs can enjoy themselves again. And in terms of we can enjoy ourselves again. I know what I would just touch on briefly before I go. It's utterly not the most exciting thing in the world, but I like to, what we call it, housekeeping. I want to talk about little things that maybe you wouldn't have been aware of. I wrote about this yesterday. Tottenham have been selected as the highest scoring bidder for a lease on the Whitewebs golf course land, which is near Hotspur Way. I can already see you rolling your eyes and people going, oh God, Tottenham Hotspur Property FC or whatever. This isn't like that. This isn't the same as those kind of things. This is a 25-year lease on land. And the main idea of this land is not to provide a golf course for Gareth Bale, or what some people said yesterday. And it's not the club looking to expand their portfolio of property. It's not that. This is a leasing thing. And what it's actually going to do, which I think is pretty cool, but it's maybe just me, is it's not going to be a golf course. It's going to be for, they're going to turn one of the clubhouses into a new girls and women's academy, which is going to feed into Tottenham Hotspur Women, which is brilliant. I think that's fantastic. You know, some of the top Premier League sides are doing that for their women's teams. I think that's wonderful that Tottenham will have that proper formalised place. They're going to have, this is probably of slightly less interest to people, but it's another cool thing, like a turf academy, which is for like groundsmen, groundskeepers to perfect their ability. And obviously that will benefit Tottenham. It'll benefit everything they do as well. And apart from that, they're just kind of opening up the parkland for people to enjoy. So yeah, I know this took a weird turn. You probably thought at the start of this video you weren't going to be hearing talk about leasing out a golf course and all that. But it's just one of those things that Tottenham have done where we're not talking about millions either. I think there's been some talk, it's something like £100,000 a year lease. It might not be exactly what it was, but it's something around that I keep hearing. So yeah, it's not like that money could be going towards a transfer. It's not that. It's just another very cool thing of setting up stuff that overall I think will improve Tottenham Hotspur as an entire club. You know, I know some people may not be interested in the women's game. Some people might not be interested in how good the pitches are and stuff like that, the training pitches they work on. But for me, I'm someone that likes the whole thing. I like the youth aspect. I like the women's side of the game. And so that's pretty cool. So that's just to inform you about that's happening. And if anyone says to you, you know, oh, Thomas, we're bloody buying a golf course as well. Oh, I don't even do anything about the football. It's like, well, it actually is to do with the football. It's quite cool. I wrote a story on it yesterday. Have a little look and you actually get all the full details on it. It's not what other people might tell you it is. I agree that I think sometimes Tottenham do very much focus on property. When you'd hope they'd focus more on the pitch, but this is not one of those things. This is actually to do with football as well. But yeah, so that's that. That's Tottenham Hotspur this week. Like I say, hopefully Paratici, either in the next, either this weekend or early into next week, we'll get that formal unveiling of him. But like I say, I think he'll still be in Italy, so I'd be surprised if we see him here. You know, they can chuck a shirt to him anyway, can't they? Or he can do it. Nowadays, you can do any kind of unveiling thing. And then Paulo Fonseca, you'd imagine they'll try and get him in the country. Last I saw, not that I'm stalking him much, but he was in Sardinia, I think. So how that works with him getting over, you'd think with your new head coach, you'd probably want him there and you know, present at Hotspur Way with a shirt and all of that. So whether they have to get him there first is another thing. He may well have already travelled. I don't know. I think it's 5 days isolation, isn't it? So maybe if he's travelled this weekend, potentially in the middle of the week you could see him. But I don't think it'll be that long. Like I say, as I always say, it's Tottenham Hotspur. So I'm always going to use the expression barring a disaster, because I've had to use that only in recent weeks and we've seen that the disaster happened. But barring a disaster, it will be Fabio Paratici as the I don't think that we know the title exactly yet, but it will be some kind of general manager role, and we'll have Paulo Fonseca as the new head coach. Like I say, try and come into it an open mind. That's not to be patronising in any way. It's just purely because it's just for you to enjoy it a bit more. No one wants to sit there and moan and go into it with doom and gloom before it's even started. Like I say, I think you're going to enjoy the football. I just hope that this new look backroom staff will provide the foundations for a good balance as well. And certainly I'm going to come into it with an open mind. He seems a charismatic guy. Yes, I've seen the video of him dressing up as Zorro in one press conference because he lost a bet or something. I think he's going to be good fun for me as a journalist. I think Paratici is going to be very interesting for me as a journalist to get better insight into some of the decisions that are made that frustrate me and frustrate you. It'd be good to get that. And like I say, I don't think not a clear out, but a revamp of the squad with a lot of the players who weren't really going to be top choices as first teamers moving on and being replaced. And also, Fonseca will work with younger players as well. You know, I'm quite excited to see what he could do for the likes of Oliver Skipp and for Ryan Sessegnon and even the very young players like the Alfie Devines and Dane Scarletts and all of that, Niall John and players like that. And because the UEFA Conference League, like I've said before, that will be their avenue, Tottenham. That will be their chance to use young players and fringe players a lot because, quite frankly, there's no need to play a first team in it. Even if, I don't think there's the pride and glory in winning it, honestly. Look at the prizes. You only win a Europa League spot if you win it. And yes, Spurs can't turn their nose up at any silverware. I was going to say software. Any silverware. But ultimately, with the teams that are in it, you can afford to play fringe players and young players, like you can do in the qualifying rounds of the Europa League and stuff like that. So that will be a good breeding ground for a lot of these young players to get a game time for Fonseca to work with them. And let's hope it starts moving in a positive direction again. You know, I don't want to do any more videos like last one, which apparently the last one was actually trending on YouTube at one point. How to see a man absolutely frustrated and wailing about the football club he covers. But yeah, no, apparently it was trending. I think it was actually in the top 10. I presume that's only for UK or something for a little while, which kind of just shows that people like to see a man in pain. But yeah, no, I've enjoyed researching Paratici and Fonseca this week. I can definitely see the positives. I can definitely understand why, you know, other people might have wanted other people, have wanted this kind of person, wanted that kind of person, might have thought, why didn't you go for Ten Hag, for Potter, for I can never pronounce his name, the Sevilla manager. I saw someone saying Rafa Benitez, Unai Emery, people like that as well. But ultimately, I think I can understand the profile fits for me. But it could be a disaster. It could be marvellous. This is Tottenham Hotspur. That's what they do. Sublime to the ridiculous within minutes. So we'll soon find out which way it goes, but fingers crossed. I'm just glad to have some closure. I'd love to be able to look forward and not be talking about bringing in the new manager or bringing in the director of football. Let's crack on. Let's get them in place and let's start actually talking about transfers and, even better than that, the new season ahead and hopefully some hope, something to look forward to. So yeah, I'm going to head off there before I get too deep. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.